Today I'm going to talk to you about collecting data. So let's imagine we want to collect some data about what facilities to build in a local town. Now, we've got two possibilities here. We could look at taking information from the whole population, or we can take a sample. In real life, it's more difficult to find data about the entire population. That would be called a census. And so realistically, what we do is we take a sample. And we're going to look at the appropriate ways to take samples from an entire population. The first thing we need to know is what's an appropriate sample size to take? You might have that set as a question, or you might have to decide. And there's a general rule of thumb, and this is only a rough rule of thumb, but really if you take the square root of the entire population, then that gives you an idea of an appropriate sample size. So if your population was, if your entire population, say of Ormiston College, was 1400, then the square root of 1400 would give you an appropriate sample size to take, which is roughly 37. So you could take a suitable sample size of 37 students if you were looking at only the student population, and that would give you a reasonable sample size and you'd have a reasonable amount of data. So the square root of the population gives you a guide on the size of the population. Sometimes in a question you're told what sample size to take, and then you need to decide how you're going to collect that sample. A good way is look at the breakdown of the entire population into certain groups. For example, you might want to look at the breakdown of males or females. So if we were looking at trying to design some reasonable facilities and there were, say, 120 males in this population and only 50 females, we would then need to come up with a way of making sure that our sample reflected the entire population. So I'm going to talk about a stratified sample. Taking a stratified sample is a way of selecting a set amount that you want that reflects the proportion of breakdown of different groupings in your whole population. So I'm just going to write down I'll make this data up, just give me a chance, and we'll look at how we take a stratified sample. Alright, so in actual fact I've got a gym population, or a leisure centre. So you've got a leisure centre population where there's 120 males, adults, 60 females, and then you've got 90 boys and 30 girls of child variety. So the first thing you need to know when you're going to take a stratified sample, what's the sample size you're going to take? So we're going to take a sample of 50 from here. Now if I was just taking any sample, I'd just take the same number from each year group, but that wouldn't reflect the proportion of each groupings within the population. So to take the stratified sample, there's a few ways we can do it. We can work out what fraction of the whole population is each group, and then find out what that fraction is of 50. You could turn that fraction into a percentage and take that percentage from that. It's really up to you. Fractions, decimals, and percentages are all equivalent. So I'm going to just look at the fraction out of the whole population. So first of all, I need to find out how many are in my population. So I've got 120, takes me to 180. Okay, so it takes me to 300. We've got a population of 300 members at this leisure centre. The male adults take up 120 of those out of 300. So as a fraction, we've got 120 out of 300. Now I can cancel that fraction down. Both of those numbers divide into 6. Then I can just double it. In fact, if I divide them into 3, I get 4 out of 10. So we get divide it into 30. Sorry, we get 4 out of 10. So 4 out of 10, or 40% of the whole population, are male adults, right? So we can write that that's 40%. Now, when I want to know how many male adults to select at random from my sample size, I need to find out what 40% of 50 is. 40% of 50 is, so 10% is 5, 5 times 4 is 20. So I will be taking a sample size of 20 male adults at random from my whole population. All right, let's do the same for female adults. So female adults take up 60 out of the full population of 300, okay, which works out at 2 out of 10, so 20% of the entire population is made up of female adults. So to find out how many I should choose from my sample size, I want 20% of 50. So 20% of 50, well, 10% is 5, so therefore I need to take 10 female adults from my population to collect as a sample. So far we've got 30 in our sample. And if we do this correctly, this should add up to 50, which is our sample size. So male children, well, boys take up 90 out of 300. 90 out of 300, well, that simplifies to 3 out of 10, which is 30%. So 30% of our population are boys. So to find out how many we need to choose out of our sample of 50, we are taking 15 boys. That's 30% of 50. And then lastly, the girls, well, they take up 30 out of a total of 300 from the population, which breaks down to be 10% of our population. So 10% of our population are female or girls. So let's work out what 10% of 50 is to find out how many girls should be part of my sample. Now, if we have a look at this, I've got 10% of 50 is 5. So 20 plus 10 is 30, 45, 50. There's my breakdown, and that's the number of people that I should take from each subgroup to ensure I've got my sample size of 50. Now, how you collect your sample is very important. I think I briefly mentioned that it should be randomly taken. So you can't just grab the first 20 male adults that you see, because we're going to take 20 at the leisure centre. We need to make sure that we take those people randomly. And one of the ways to do that is to give everybody a number. You'd have a roll at the leisure centre. Every person will have a number, and you can make sure that you use some kind of number generator, random number generator. Your calculator has the ability to randomly generate a number between a set interval. And you can just generate, say number 3 came up, and that's a way of randomly selecting that person who is number 3 on the roll will be your first male adult that you will select. And you do the same, making sure that you've got your correct proportions for your sample size. And that is called taking a stratified sample. Sometimes we don't know what sample size we want to take, so we could say take 10% from each subgroup. So if I didn't know I wanted to take a sample of 50, then I could take 10% from each group. I'd take 12 from this group, 6 from this group, 9 from this group, and 3 from this group, and that would still reflect the overall population. And that's pretty much everything you need to know about collecting data.